Hi everyone, this is Dr. Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode. We're talking about variation in training today, which is a cool topic relating to posture. How are you today, Sophie?
Hi, Raquel. I'm really well. This is a topic that you introduced to me when I was your student, doing the equine athlete, and also coming over from disease injury and rehab, and how the two came together. Super awesome topic, and you have spent a number of years teaching it at uni. So awesome that we're touching on it today.
Yeah, it's an important subject in the equine science course. That was part of the curriculum when I was teaching. And I think it's something that people don't always think about because we get a bit caught up in our discipline. So I definitely do it, like I'm being known to do the same thing over and over again, like groundwork sessions or, riding around the arena every day, and just get stuck in doing the same because it's easy, it's familiar. You feel like you're working towards your goal. However, it's not always optimal for the horse in terms of like their physical and mental health. And even in terms of preparation, like what are some of first of all, why did we even come to the importance of variation in training? Like there's one important structure in the body that really likes variation. What is it? Can you say that again? Because it was a bit hard to hear you.
Fascia. So fascia is on a very base layer. When I first learned about fascia, for anybody who doesn't know, it was described to me as the connection that threads through absolutely every structure in the body. So it's around every blood vessel, it's around every nerve, and it connects into different layers of muscle all the way down to the fiber. So like there's just so many layers of fascia. It runs around the spinal cord, underneath the skin. Sometimes people just talk about it as the the bubbly tissue that is underneath the skin when, you're dissecting or when people are dealing with meat, but it's just so much more than that. It's like, I actually read once that the soul lives in the fascia, which was just like, it was just an interesting way of thinking about it. And I know that I've read about the comments from other people who work in somatic trauma and things like that, just how deeply fascia is embedded to us on a nervous level. It encompasses everything. But in the topic of fitness today, it's also very important.
Yeah, and it's a very fluid structure. So it's got like an extracellular matrix within it. So it's like a fluid matrix with collagen microtubules. And it's a really, like, if anyone is more interested in looking at it, you should look at the YouTube video called Strolling Under the Skin, because it really gives you an understanding of how dynamic fascia is and how fluid it is, but also the importance of its fluidity and structure in the health of the tissues that it surrounds. So, and I read a paper a fair few years ago now that I get the students to read themselves. It's actually a human paper, and it talks about the importance of variation for fascia and how fascia does not like to do the same thing. So if we're always focused on strength, for example, the fascia gets really tight. If we're always doing a lot of mobility, the fascia can get a bit kind of loose in some people. And our fascial health depends on like our nutritional status, our metabolic status. So, you know, like I feel some horses when I treat them, they're just so tight. And I'm like, there's an underlying metabolic issue here. Or I felt another horse this week that was too loose, like the muscles and everything were too flaccid. And so again, there's like an imbalance there within the system. And so when fascia is functioning optimally, you know, it surrounds the muscle and like you said, everything, but it allows it to all work in a very fluid motion. Nothing looks tight, nothing looks floppy. It just looks connected. And so in that paper, it talked about how fascia likes a variation of like mobilization, flexibility. It needs time to rehydrate to allow the fluid to come back into the fascia, which we'll talk about how we can do that. It likes to be stretched and lengthened, sometimes for long periods of time. And it likes ballistic type motions as well, like really quick kind of gymnastic type motion. So it for its optimal health, it loves variation, and the body, you know, there's more and more knowledge now coming available in training athletes, like especially in humans, where wasn't there a swimmer in the Olympics? I think it was a swimmer who said that he didn't swim a heap. He didn't swim that much. He was focused on doing other exercise that strengthened those appropriate muscles. And so we get caught up in, okay, well, I'm a swimmer, I need to swim. Or I'm a dressage rider, I have to focus on dressage. Or I'm a show jumper, I have to jump. Or I guess the eventers are the ones that need to do everything. But, you know, we get really caught up in the discipline and going, well, I have to focus on that. But it's actually not the case. You need to understand your discipline. Like, what things could people understand about their discipline that would help them create a training plan?
So that may include the level of strength that your horse needs to carry out certain demands. So, you know, a horse that is jumping needs a very strong hindquarter strength, particularly, you know, for the hamstrings, jumping up and over. A horse that, but they also need a level of endurance to get through the entire round of show jumping. And it's not just one jump, it's together all the way through. And then another discipline, such as endurance, you know, the horse needs hindquarter strength in order to have good stability and function as they travel uphill and downhill. But they also need a level of fitness that's going to sustain them over the length of that competition or that ride out. So, you know, the intensity, yeah, or number of days, the intensity and the level of strength that your horse needs, particularly in different parts of the body, for the demand of their sport, and then thinking about, you know, how else can I introduce training to these areas that isn't going to overtrain, you know, a certain movement and put us at risk of injury, but the intensity, the duration, and things like that are all considerations that you can think about for your discipline. And there's a lot of information out there once you start looking that people within your discipline will have considered that for their discipline and have contributed to literature or resources that are available for you, often through groups, online pages, forums. There's a lot available.
Yeah, and you want to think about, like, with your discipline, you know, what surfaces is your discipline competing on, and are they varying, you know, because like for me at home, I don't have an arena, I don't have sand. So if I wanted to start going out and doing dressage, yeah, I can do the dressage stuff in the paddock, but I'm not training my horse on sand. So he is not fit for me to take out and do a couple of dressage tests in a day on sand. I'd have to really carefully consider that for him, even though he might be fit. You know, so you've got to consider what surfaces that your discipline is being competed on. You also need to consider, you know, do you go out and do one dressage test in a day or two? Is your discipline over multiple days? Like, you know, I did a working equitation comp last year. It was over 3 days. Now, for Jelly, the 3 days was too much. The first day there was a lot of nervous energy. He hadn't competed for a couple of years. The second day he felt awesome, and the third day he's like, I'm really tired. My body is struggling at the moment. So you need to consider, is it a multi-day? Is it a single day? Is what's in a single day? Do you even incorporate that in your training? Because we often will train once a day and we'll do like a longer session, but perhaps we should consider doing shorter, more targeted sessions multiple times over the day. Also for our horses' emotional resilience, because we get them to a competition and they've only ever worked once in a day at home. And then we're like, oh, hey, sorry, you've got to pull up for a second dressage test today, or actually now I've got to go do show jumping. And so they're like, what? I was resting. Like, we've done our work for today. So we need to consider that. But in terms of kind of health of the body, like what kind of things do we need to consider? Like the benefit of thinking about variation in training.
So one that always speaks to me is preventing injury. Horses need variation to fulfill. So as you're training, you're building strength and integrity within the tissues, whether that's the muscles, conditioning the ligaments and the tendons, and the fascia, as well as you were just talking about. So if you are considering that your horse has multiple needs, including their endurance, their strength, and the integrity as they go through a movement out in a competition, or, in a more formal setting than just bumming around at home, or even if you are just bumming around at home, then in order to not overwork or like overstrain a structure that leads to an injury, you want to have condition the body to hold up to that level of movement. So, if you're going to start racing around and propping at a stop, you want to have already conditioned the body to handle that level through gradually increasing their tolerance to that kind of movement. And that includes includes literally every movement. If you go out and you jump your horse at a level they haven't jumped before without building up to what you were saying about the surfaces and the height they're jumping, or the setting for it, the chance that they're going to strain something or pull something, have a minor injury, is much greater than if you've conditioned them up to the point that they could handle that movement. So for me, I think preventing injury is huge.
Yeah, like preventing injury, maintaining joint health. Like joints love mobility, but they don't love overloading. And so, we want to promote movement, but we also want to keep the difficult movements where there's a lot of kind of stress going through the joints to a minimum. So, we don't need to practice high jumps and extended trots and high level collection a lot. We just need to make sure that the foundations for those things are solid. And so when we think about the foundations for any discipline, one of the foundations that I think is commonly missed, and it's commonly missed early on in the training, but it's also missed throughout the training, is like the proprioception, balance and control. So, I've met horses who are at quite a high level, and when I ask them, can they balance, can they do a slow movement, do they have control over each limb? They don't. And so they're using momentum and speed to often counteract that proprioception or lack of balance and control. And then over time, they're overloading the front end, they're overloading the hind end suspensories, they're getting, arthritis in the base of their neck and things because they don't have appropriate body control. And so we need to consider proprioception and balance and limb control as a foundation of our training and something we check throughout. So it needs to be part of a variation in training. What other things would be incorporated in a training plan in terms of creating variation and appropriate training?
Appropriate training would include making sure that you have variability of the movements, variability of the training, including both lengthening and shortening of muscles under tension. So that is, for example, having, a weight in your hand and asking your weight to gently lower to the ground under tension at the same time as you, just like you would as you do a bicep curl, as you raise it up. So the bicep muscle itself is lengthening and shortening. So making sure that you are targeting muscles and tissue in a way that allows them to lengthen and shorten and also just hold, in a tension, not like a brace, but be able to have integrity in just holding so that when you go out, you have reach, the ability to lengthen, the ability to contract as you go around. I'd definitely be making sure that was incorporated. There's certainly a lot of horses you see in bodywork or just, horses that have developed a chronic posture where they are either flexed or extended through the lumbosacral, and they're stuck in a position that doesn't have a lot of ability to lengthen or contract over or above the lumbosacral joint. So they're just in this tonic state. What else?
Well, I think that comes into then not overdoing a certain type of training, because if you're, say, always doing the same type of training, then you're more likely to get a muscle that's kind of, inappropriately shortened or lengthened compared to others. And so that's where, so you've got that awareness, but, for people, they might not understand the concept of which muscles need to lengthen and which muscles need to shorten. But I think it's important to think about your muscle balance of your horse and, are they overdeveloped in one area and underdeveloped in another, because then they're not lengthening and shortening appropriately, and they're not using those muscles. So for example, quads and hamstrings are massive. Like if you see a jumping horse with weak floppy quads and really well developed hamstrings, like they're not using appropriate power in that hind end. So I think that's a good example. So, with the foundations of variation in a program, so we've talked about like proprioception, balance control, strength, mobility, like because you talked about mobility of the lumbosacral joint, and flexibility is also going to be really important. But we do have a problem in some horses like warm bloods where we have a hypermobility, and so you've got to know your strengths and weaknesses of your horse too, because if they're a bit hypermobile, like I treated a horse, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, anyway, he felt amazing in his body, but he was hypermobile, so he could do everything very easily, could reach the tip of his tail, no problem at all. And I said to the owner, they're like, he finds lateral work so easy. And I'm like, okay, you don't do lateral work, like you actually need to focus on strength, transitions, straightness, stability for this horse. The lateral stuff will be easy for him. So you don't need to practice that because you'll just promote the hypermobility. Anyway, the second time I saw him, he was just a different horse. They're like, they'd done what I said, and he felt amazing. Like there was so much more strength in his body. So understanding what variation your horse needs, like for Jelly, I actually do need to focus on mobility and flexibility because he's got stiffness in his lumbar, he's got stiffness in his neck. So for him, it's a different focus to what a young horse would be, where you want to maintain that stability and not do so much flexibility, and you want to just build their stamina and strength over time. So the other foundations are, so you've got proprioception, balance and control, which should be the foundation of every horse in every discipline. You've also got long, slow distance, which we're going to go into, which is also a foundation for every horse in every discipline. Then you've got interval training, which is going to be specific to your horse and your discipline. And then we've got flexibility training, which is also going to be individualized to your horse and your discipline. And so when we're thinking about, you know, creating variation in our horse's training plan, these are the foundations. So it's just a few examples. If you just want to give a few examples of proprioception, balance and control, how people could incorporate that in their training.
So the first thing that I would be thinking of is the equine functional posture course, to be honest, because it's comprehensive enough to make sure that you've got your bases covered and that you're understanding your horse's limitations that we just talked about, turning on their spinal stabilizers and asking them to connect mentally to their limbs for their proprioception, and understanding at a base layer that with the balance and control, you really want to hone in on those. They don't have to be perfect before you build fitness, because at a level they start to go hand in hand, but that if you start increasing fitness without having proprioception, balance and control, you are only reinforcing patterns of movement that don't serve the horse for sustainable movement. So you want to have those before you move into the fitness, so that as you move forward, you're improving with those systems. And it's about sustainability as well. You know, it's to make sure that it's healthy movement that you're reinforcing. And examples of that can be, you know, surfaces. Just thinking about in the very beginning, you might be using a variation of trails, stepping over logs, proprioceptive tools. Our episode with Robin Hood on T-touch bandages, the wand, and you know, once your horse is getting a bit further up the balance tools ladder, maybe using bridges, you know, that, what do you call them? Balance bridges, where they move once you're on them.
Yeah.
They're really useful.
As a balancing tool, not as a movement tool. So I just want to add this, because I don't like it when the horses are standing on the bridge and the bridge is going teeter-totter, teeter-totter. That's often creating breaks. So, but if the horse is standing and maintaining both sides of the bridge off the ground, that's a really challenging balance activity that, you know, you build up to over a lot of time, but that requires postural stability and control, especially to do it without bracing and with actual balance and proprioception.
Yes.
So bridges, surfaces.
And just what you were saying, control, slow and controlled movement. So that's a real foundation of being able to, what we were just saying about connecting into the body, and also just having a very clear mental connection to your body, about having good posture, and that's built through slow and controlled movement. So
and we will definitely be talking about that more in up and coming podcasts, because it's so foundational. And like Sophie said, with the Equine Functional Posture course, the online one, like it's so foundational for any horse, but it's also really valuable for any horse at any level of any discipline, because you can't revisit that stuff enough. So yeah, it really applies at any level.
Especially and pre-training as well. You know,
young horses.
Young horses and horses who are past the ridden age but still could benefit from postural work. And then can you talk about long slow distance, you know, moving on from that foundation?
So your long slow distance is really foundational, I think. You know, we do it, but it needs to have variation within it as well. So long slow distance, you know, is considered like 40 to 60 minutes walk, trot and canter. You don't really need to do a whole lot longer than that, like 90 minutes, but it's once you kind of reach that, you know, 60 to 90 minutes, you want to then be considering if you're going to then go longer for that, even in endurance. Like I've also marked a lot of students who've done training plans for me as part of their assessment, and some people will have their horses doing like, you know, 80 kilometers. And now for a dressage person, 80 kilometers will seem like a lot, but for an endurance horse, you know, it's like pretty common. But, you know, they'll have their horse doing 80 kilometers like 3 times a week or something. And it's like, they don't need to do that. then one longer ride a week is sufficient. But having a no more than 90 minutes, like a hour ride 3-4 times a week, like that's going to build up the cardiovascular fitness. It's going to build up the strength because you just got that continuous movement. It's going to build up your aerobic fitness. So it builds up your ability for your body to use energy, ATP, and produce energy. It improves muscle strength and muscle fiber number. And so it's a really pivotal foundation where horses should just have the basics of walk, trot, and canter without a whole lot of fancy stuff, like just ideally working on efficiency of posture in those gaits. But you don't need to be doing like a whole lot of laterals or collection like that. You need to have this foundation of at least a few months before adding in those more challenging exercises, such as a lot of collection, transitions, jumping, hard lateral stuff, what else, kind of extended trot, things like that go into that. Like it's really foundational. It can be arena based, so you could be doing a session in the arena where it's walk, trot, canter, or which is even better, if you're doing it out on a trail, you're incorporating your proprioceptive stuff at the same time, and you're also giving the horse some mental, emotional stimulation too. So you can add a lot of variation with long slow distance, but it's truly a foundation. The one thing I would say is we do not need to do this every day. So I unfortunately have heard about very experienced trainers who are training their horses hard every single day, an hour, to the point of sweating. Horses have an amazing innate fitness. And once we get them to this level of fitness, so like my good endurance clients, they train smarter, not harder. So they're not working towards a 160 and going, okay, well, I need to do 5 160s before I get to that big 160. They might do one, and then in the weeks leading up to their event, they're not doing much. They're keeping the horse moving. They might do an hour of easy work. The horse is fit at that point, and any adding extra time into that is just overloading your horse. So, 3 times a week, 4 times a week max of appropriate long, slow distance, you're better off to increase intensity than increase time, so you can still do your hour, but now instead of doing 20 minutes of walking, and I don't know, instead of starting off with 1 to 2 minutes of canter, you might now be doing like 5 minutes of canter both directions. And you might be doing a couple of increments of that throughout the session. So work smarter, not harder. And don't think that you have to work your horse hard every day to get a training effect, because they are a natural athlete. They're so much more built for this than what we are. So what's the next aspect to training, which would come after the foundation of long, slow distance of a few months? Then we start to build in
the interval training. And I just wanted to say, before we moved on from the long slow distance the foundational level, is that a lot of people have horses that go to the breakers. And these are often young horses that don't have any level of fitness. They've been pulled out of the paddock and they're ready to be started. And what happens is, in order for them to have exposure, the trainer will often send them out for long trail rides, and that can be multiple times a week. And I don't know that that's appropriate, because a young horse in a new environment, absorbing a huge amount of new information on a training level, also learning to be fit, is a huge amount of stress on the body. And
it would be awesome if they'd already done stuff like that on the ground. I think we're going to talk about starting horses because I think that's really important. But, for me, there's a difference between starting and doing light rides as opposed to starting and riding, where you expect them to walk, trot, and canter. And so but we can set up this long, slow distance without riding. We can also incorporate this in a training plan without riding. It does not mean that we need to be riding them. And I think that that's really important, is that, you know, I have clients who run their horses off the side of a Can-Am, you know, so a little motorbike, 4-drive motorbike thing. And like their horses' backs are better than any horses that I see. You know, they ride them. Some of the horses they're not riding at the moment. They're young horses. They're getting started, or, you know, they're an older horse and they want to get them on straight lines and without the weight of a rider. And the more we can do that, that's really valuable. Or leading off another horse, like, you know, we can train long, slow distance, and the more we stay off them, I actually think the better it is. And we're a bit more mindful about when we ride them and why we ride them, because they're often, you know, we need to really work on that strength to posturally support themselves to be able to carry a rider.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do an episode on the dream starting regime.
Yes, well, hopefully we'll be talking to some people about that. So
yeah, definitely. But going into interval training, it's really about building strength and power. And that again comes back to looking at your discipline and the needs of your discipline and where you're trying to take your horse, and not overtraining certain movements that you could target the strength and power by doing other things, such as, you know, using heels appropriately as opposed to jumping great heights to build strength through the hindquarter so that you don't overload your joints and your structures. How would you position rest days in, and how would you use strength and power training, you know, if you were coming into starting your interval training after you've done your long, slow distance?
yeah, so I think you have to consider that, you know, you don't want to do, say, 2 interval training days in a row. You know, you want to give the horse appropriate time to recover their muscle stores of energy, so their glycogen stores, and also to recover from any, you know, muscle strain, just muscle fatigue. Because if you don't give the horse appropriate time to recover, that's where you've just got this slow build-up of like underlying strain, which, you know, you might end up doing a tendon or suspensory or some injury. You're like, oh yeah, you know, that was just unlucky. Well, it probably wasn't. It was probably related to either an underlying micro damage that hadn't repaired, underlying biomechanical dysfunction, you know, underlying other issues, you know, training, overtraining or whatever. So when you start to introduce interval training, like you might just introduce it twice a week, and you might space it out so that you might have a rest day afterwards where you might, and a rest day, I think we need to also think a little bit about active rest days rather than a rest day meaning don't touch your horse. Like it is important mentally that they have time out. But it's also valuable to do active rest days where you might take them for an in-hand walk, and like a, you know, an active 10, 15, 20-minute walk, and then do some mobilizations, which we'll talk about, that flexibility thing. So that would be a great thing to do the day after your interval training, because it gives you information. You can check how they are. You can check, is there any soreness that they've pulled up with? How are they mentally? How are they physically? Okay, they handled that training session really well. They feel fabulous today. So then next week, not tomorrow, but like next week, when I do that next interval training session, I can increase it a little bit. So thinking about that, and thinking about what you're going to incorporate in that interval session and keeping them short. They're a shorter session. They are a targeted session, and they have a lot of rest breaks in them. And the rest breaks are allowing for pretty complete recovery in that time. So, you know, some people say a ratio of like 1 work episode to equivalent to 5 like rest. So depending on your ratio, like it might be a minute of hard and then, 4 or 5 minutes of rest. And rest can be active rest. That could be a nice easy trot, where they're just stretching out. It could be a walk. It could be, for some horses, it might just mean standing. So like if I'm working in sand, Jelly's rest is actually to stop because the sand work is hard for him. Whereas if I'm out in the paddock, his rest period might be a nice stretchy trot, so you've got to consider that. So the things that we could incorporate in interval training, so you mentioned hills, fabulous. But again, it's targeted. You don't have to do 20 minutes of going uphill. It's like, okay, so we do a trot uphill and then we walk down and walk around until they recover, and then we do another trot, and then you actually measure your time, or you have some sort of measure that you can then know, okay, today I did 3 repeats, in one set, and I did 3 sets of that. And then you do that a few times, like 2 or 3 sessions, and then you go, okay, my horse is handling that fine. Next time I'm going to do 5 reps per set, but you keep the reps the same. Or, you decide I'm going to canter up, which then you would not increase your reps. You never increase reps and intensity or time at the same time. You choose one that you're going to increase, which is really important. What other things could you incorporate in your interval training sessions?
That can include sprints. So that might be, going for a good gallop, or even just like moving up into, it's just an elevation of your training as you go along. So that might be like introducing canter and then getting to the point of introducing a gallop and then increasing the time that you're galloping. It can include collection. So that's something that people recognize takes a long time, and it's also very energy intense to hold yourself in a collected position. It takes a lot of strength. Horses are heavy, muscles are working very hard, so it's like a weightlifting session truly to be in a collected position. It's not an easy, super easy thing for the horse. Other things include gymnastics, such as jumping or extreme, you were talking about lateral motions before, like those extreme, they can be really hard and exhausting. The horse is using a lot of power, and transitions as well.
And gymnastics could also include, like if you have if you're in a Western discipline, then your gymnastics session could include like stopping, turning, going around barrel, like your skills where you need strength and power in those sessions. It's really important to make sure that before the interval session you've got a really good warm-up. And so to warm up, it depends obviously on the weather, because in winter you do need a much longer warm-up as you do compared to summer, especially summer over here where it's like 35, 40 degrees. But so you need to consider making sure that you've got an appropriate warm-up and an appropriate cool down when you're doing interval training. So from a scientific perspective, it takes 5 minutes of a good active trot to warm up the muscles, or a good 15-minute active walk. For some horses, it might be more appropriate to add a canter into their warm-up, it's a good way to warm up, especially if you're going to do things like transitions or stopping, to warm up that lumbosacral joint and the hips. The canter is quite useful for that. In terms of a cool down, your cool down could be a nice easy trot, walking. It doesn't have to be long cool down, but you want to get, it's really useful if you're monitoring your horse's heart rate, because then you can actually have even more of an idea about workload and recovery, because then you'd actually go, okay, my cool down is until I get to a specific heart rate. You'd know what your horse needs in terms of a cool down. A cool down could also be flexibility exercises like mobilizations, and sometimes I will chuck on an Activo Med rug as part of my cool down regime, or it can be used as a warm-up regime. But you definitely want to make sure you've warmed up well and you've cooled down well for whatever your interval training session is going to be, and consider what is working in that interval training session. So the next part, so we've talked about proprioception, balance and control, long, slow distance, interval training, and now flexibility. So what kind of things would we include in flexibility exercises?
Well, you were just talking about mobilizations. So we have actually another episode called mobilizations, activations, and lengthening exercises that would be really good to listen to for anybody who hasn't. And that goes into how we use them and what for. But as a general rule, it encourages, as a mobilization, you're asking the body to move. Either you're moving the horse or the horse is moving. Actively looking for a carrot, or you're doing physical stretches where you ask the tissues to stretch and move and open and close joints, and it's really good for joint health. And it also, tissue responds to the movement you ask it to do. So mobilizing the body increases the flexibility, basically. Over time, the body. Yeah,
Fascia loves it.
Yep. Absolutely. And lateral work. Would you describe how that contributes to flexibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it can add to brace if it's not done in a manner that the horse is supple, relaxed, and responsive. And so, I do a lot of lateral work in the walk, to be honest, because that's where there's the most relaxation and the most joint movement throughout the body, like including the spine. And so, yeah, things like shoulder in, travers, half pass, especially in the walk, are really useful flexibility exercises. Sidestepping, all of those sorts of exercises. But again, it's doing them in a manner where the horse is relaxed and supple and responsive, and not in a manner where there is brace and resistance, because otherwise you're not actually, like, you might be promoting flexibility of the limbs, but you're not promoting, flexibility of the thoracic sling or the pelvic function, like you're actually promoting brace in the upper body. So we just need to consider that. And mobilizations and flexibility work, like, they could be a part of your session. So they could be like you focus on them 2 to 3 times a week within a session. Like it might be at the end of your interval training session. So that would be like twice a week. And then you might have one other day where you do it, maybe incorporating into an active rest day. So they might be on their own, or they might be after a hard session. Or they might be part of a warm-up if they're used appropriately. But you need to understand when to use them and how to do them appropriately, which also in our equine functional posture course, like that's a foundation of one of the modules is mobilizations. So if we're talking about horses' ability to maintain fitness, are they good athletes?
They're exceptional athletes. They are actually one of the most incredible athletes there are, with the ability to have such extreme speed and such extreme endurance. It's very unique, really. And so horse fitness is very important. So when we're talking about variable training, the topic of this podcast, it's very useful for overcoming plateaus. Sometimes people get stuck and the horse can't progress, and you need to add variability to meet other needs in order to bring their fitness level up to meet the demands of what you're asking them to do. And of course, targeting different goals. So strength, endurance, cardiovascular, deciding what's most applicable for you. And horses maintain fitness very impressively. Would you talk about, the level, how long before their fitness begins to recede?
Yeah, from a cardiovascular perspective, they can maintain fitness for at least 6 weeks, depending on how long they've been in training for, whereas we start to lose it quite rapidly after 2 weeks. Yep. So they do, so a horse that's been turned out for a few weeks, to maintain cardiovascular fitness, once they're fit, you don't need to train them all the time. Like, they'll maintain that fitness super easy. We're better off to focus on that quality and efficiency of movement than to continue focusing on the cardiovascular aspect, especially if you've done a great aerobic long slow distance foundation. Then you'll have, and then you've used your interval training appropriately to train them cardiovascularly as well. So, you've got quite a clear measure there of your horse's cardiovascular fitness. Horses will lose strength though a lot quicker, especially if it's not ingrained. So like, if you look at humans and you look at a ballerina, right? And they've been doing it. So my sister was a ballerina and she danced for years and years and years. So she still has a degree of postural strength and stability, even though she hasn't danced for years. It's innate in her. So a horse that's done a lot of postural foundation work, they're going to hold their postural strength for a lot longer, maybe months to years in the paddock. But especially if it was really like the patterns were really ingrained in them. But if they don't have appropriate postural strength or self-carriage or appropriate function, they'll lose it pretty quickly in terms of postural strength. So you'll see them start to get a dip in the back or start to see sloppiness in the paddock, the difference in the way they're standing, So when we do give horses time off, it's great if they're doing things in the paddock that still promote postural strength, like variable feeding, like variation in their paddock environment.
To move. Yeah,
heaps of room to move. Different variation in their paddock environment, like dam banks and things like that, because you're actually doing yourself a favor when they come back into work and maintaining some of that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about an example of variation in training. So an example could be that you do long slow distance 2 to 3 times a week, which could incorporate arena work, hacking out, unridden, it could be leading the horse off another horse. So a 40 to 60 minute session, walk, trot and canter. Interval training 1 to 2 times a week, depending on where you are in your training schedule. Absolute max 3 times a week. You don't need to do that more than 3 times a week, really. Your skills training could be within your interval training or your long slow distance. So in a long slow distance session, you might include some transitions, some slow and controlled movement, some proprioception. And in your interval training, you might include transitions in a different way, hills, and creating like gymnastics, jumping skills, those sorts of specific techniques. Your mobilizations, you want to include them 2 to 3 times a week, but you want to make sure they're suited to your horse's degree of stiffness or mobility. They could be part of an active rest day, but it definitely would do them after a harder work session, so especially when you're first starting out with, maybe they're starting getting ridden or they're starting with their interval training, like doing them after those sessions is really valuable. It also leaves their body in the best possible place. And I mean, I'm always looking for my sessions, ridden or unridden, that my horse ends those sessions in a better place than when they started. But if, perhaps there was a bit of brace, a bit of tension, then you can do that by doing mobilizations post work.
Yeah.
So what about the takeaway points? What are you thinking there?
Really just that when you work with your horse, think about how you can prepare them with the most variation and the most efficient training so that you don't have to overtrain physically or mentally. And just touching on that mentally, the fact that horses enjoy variation. They like getting out and doing different things. And there's a reason, that some horses become arena sour or they get stuck with their friends. They value having interesting stimulation, and it adds value to their life to get out and do different things and to feel good in their body. So for them, not overtraining and feeling good while they're working with you is always going to contribute to their welfare and well-being. So just knowing how to prepare for your discipline and fill your horse's bucket, so that they are having the best experience that they possibly can, working with you and forming positive associations and enjoyable experiences. So Jack Ballou has some great books that people can use to get started as well. If you wanted to know more, you think there's a possibility that you need to improve your skills at preparing your horse. One book is 33 strength and fitness workouts. And of course, we talked about the fact that equine functional posture course is a foundation for any discipline. If you are bringing up a young horse, bringing a horse back into work, know your horse's posture isn't fantastic, have a look and see when the next level 1 is starting up in 2025.
Yeah, and also if you're wanting to do an individualized fitness plan for your horse, you can contact me through the links that are provided. I'm happy to work with you in that and figuring out your horse's strengths and weaknesses, and to help you get the most out of your horse. And I just want to say one thing with the takeaway points is, we've talked about the importance of variation, but it's finding the variation that suits you, your horse, and that's not creating stress for your horse. Like, obviously, if your horse hates trails, then maybe you're not going to go on trails, but you could take them for walks out and maybe they're more confident with that. You could lead them off another horse and maybe they're more confident with that. Like, don't compromise their emotional, mental relaxation and health for the physical. So, find the thing that motivates your horse to give them rest in their work. So like for Henry, when I used to, he found the groundwork, the targeted work quite hard, like doing shouldering and stuff on the ground. He found it was challenging for him. So we had a deal that after we do the hard stuff, I would let him go and we'd play at liberty. And so he would run after me and we'd kind of run from one side to the arena to the other. And sometimes there'd be treats and, he'd just be at liberty. That was his little fun thing to do. For some horses, it might be that they get scratching time, and you make sure that they have scratching sessions regularly. For other horses, it might be getting off the property. For some horses, it might be doing some groundwork. Like it might be something else. So really figure out how you can fill your horse's cup, because honestly, they will work so much better for you when they feel, like they've got an interesting life and they've got that variation, and it's amazing how it changes their connection to their body and their ability to emotionally regulate as well. So thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler and Sophie Vandenberg, in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please keep an eye out, as Sophie said, for our next Equine Functional Posture online course. And subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes. We'd also love you to give us a rating and a comment if you enjoyed it, so that we can keep improving our reach. And find the links to our socials in the comments.
And we'll see you in the next exciting episode.